So I am very pleased. See, you put together the conference, and then you get to schedule yourself as much as you want. I didn't know if anyone knew. I'm talking all these talks are mine. So I'm here to talk about Bacalhau, the State of the Union 2023. Last time you heard from me, it was 2022 in Lisbon, and I'm very excited. We have a ton of new updates to get to, so we'll go through everything. Can you start the timer? Sorry. I'm trying a thing. We'll see if this works. You can scan this QR code, keep your phone out. You can ask me questions. I'll answer them at the end. We'll see if this works. And off we go. Great, thank you. Okay, so a little bit of the history of Bacalhau. I love talking about it because it's funny to me anyway, which is all that matters. The year was 2021. The question we were seeing was there was this enormous growth of data everywhere, and it was up to, the fundamental question we had was, could we build a distributed computation system that was built for decentralized compute, truly touching everything in the world rather than just, inside a single data center? We were in Portugal at the time, where we were sitting around talking. And we decided to really invest and make this. And by we, I mean Protocol Labs, who incubated us the entire time, helping to move against their, at the time, 17, now 19 exabytes of stuff they have on their network. And we kept abbreviating it as COD, C-O-D, and we kept writing that over and over again. How do you say COD in Portuguese? Bacalhau. That's how we got the name. That's what we are. That is our logo, although it's not the original logo. The original logo was kind of funny here. I was looking for it. I couldn't find it when I was putting the slide together. We should dig that up somewhere. Anyhow, so that's when we get started. In February of 2022, we wrote our first line of code. We had our first little mini Computer for Data Summit in Paris. We did our alpha launch in June. We had our second Computer for Data Summit in November of 2023, or 2022, excuse me, along with the Computer for Data Summit. And we delivered a whole bunch. Not me, of course, the entire team, many of whom are here today. Support for 1,000+ nodes, 10,000 jobs running simultaneously, multi-arch support, huge success rate, 99% success rate, GPUs, HTTP downloads, Filecoin, Estuary, and so on. And those were some of our original goals, but along the way we delivered a whole bunch more. Simple private clusters, S3 rewrite, centralized logging, Python SDKs, Airflow executors, and so on. Just an absolute ton of stuff over that entire year. And we really are just getting started. To show you, I like to revisit these slides because a lot of people are like, well, is this complicated to use? And for me, I think it's so important to show exactly how not complicated Bacalhau is to use, right? You want to run Python? There you go. 3 options to run Python, just like you would run anything else. In this case, it's running inside of a Docker container. We also support WASM, so you can execute it straight from the command line or hand it a script, but you can do a lot of that stuff there. You have running R. There's your R script. Pretty straightforward. You take your container and run it, and off you go. Pandas. Obviously, you just heard from Peter from Anaconda. Pandas and Python is one of the most important frameworks for running on data science. Here's you running a complex Python script against CSVs. Both of which you upload via IPFS. And again, IPFS is just an implementation detail. You can use S3, you can use whatever you like, but you can absolutely do it with IPFS, which we support. You can run using DuckDB. Here you are executing an arbitrary query against DuckDB using Bacalhau. You can run YOLO on it, one of the most popular object detection frameworks, against the weights and running your Python script against it. And then, of course, what presentation in 2023 would be possible without mentioning Stable Diffusion? This is it. Seriously. It's one line of code. You put your prompt, and off you go. And then you get, nightmare fuel. So pretty straightforward stuff. we were able to achieve this all in well south of a year. This is actually a lot of the demo stuff that I showed in Portugal, which was 6 months ago. And we made a lot of progress since then. And that's what I'm here to talk about today. Again, we're going to keep popping these up. Don't forget, you can ask me a question. Please do so. We'll show them at the end. And so a lot of people say, okay, well, there's so much flexibility of these platforms. It reminds me very much of the early Kubernetes days, where you would start a Kubernetes and you'd be like, all right, well, what the hell can I do with it? I was like, I don't know, it's a cluster of containers. Do whatever you want with it. It's Kubernetes. So I want to highlight a few things that we're already seeing people use Bacalhau for today, and hopefully inspire folks to encourage us to explore what we can do next. So the first thing I like to stress is transforming the data before you move. Before you used Bacalhau, it would look something like this. You would start, you'd say, okay, I want to transform my data before I move it. Here I have my data being produced somewhere in the world. The data could come from basically anything: log files, text files, video, images, whatever. This is super common. You normally don't generate data in the exact same place your massive cluster of computers is. Normally, you're generating it next to your users and things like that, because that's where the data is being created and then ultimately used. And you might want to move that data to your central compute cluster, which is okay, except you run into a lot of problems in movement. I posted this question to Twitter. I had some ideas, and they just kept going. I couldn't even fit everything on here. And it's true, right? A lot of folks are just looking at something as simple as bandwidth and speed of actually moving this stuff, but there's so much subtlety to it. Just taking, for example, the time to compress and decompress things as you move it along the path can take a huge amount of time. Let alone sanitizing, removing PII. Let's not forget that moving raw logs into your central cluster was literally the cause of Log4j, something that shut the entire internet down for like a day or two as everyone freaked out. Overloading your network, changing security criteria. Your embedded device or your external devices often has a very small security criteria where your center is where all your precious data is, so you don't want to share it. Schema ordering, so on and so forth. There's a whole bunch of problems you get the moment you move the data, particularly into something as sensitive as your central cluster. And we haven't even gotten to really what it looks like in the real world. You're not just moving it from one place, you're moving it from many, many places. And it's up to you to pick the ones that you actually want to move, which again is an even further problem, right? How do you identify all those places, just a subset, so you're not pulling back everything into this central place? It's very interesting. I talked to a number of self-driving car companies, and they record this stuff on their cars, an enormous amount of data. And very interestingly, they will report that they throw away about 98% of it. Why? Because a self-driving car that is working perfectly correctly is driving down the middle of a freeway, which provides zero value for your model, right? You don't want that. It's actively bad to move that in. It takes up space. It is indistinguishable unless you analyze it from the rest of your data. How do you downsample that so you're just moving the interesting things? Anyhow, so the point is that these are very, very hard problems. And most people are like, well, I could just, FTP it over. Which, by the way, FTP is not dead remotely. FTP is everywhere still. And the point is we need a system that's much better at this. Presto, this is where Bacalhau comes in. So you take the exact same thing you have there, you have a Bacalhau agent running on these nodes, it's very small and ready to go. It, by itself, can select into the nodes that you want to move. It can transform that data in place, addressing many, many of the concerns that we had listed earlier. And again, not trivially, you have to do some work, but you can do that work taking from your central cluster and moving that work to the edge where your data is, and then only those elements will move the data into your central cluster. So it becomes a much more repeatable, scalable, and well understood path for moving this data and transforming just what you need, instead of just shunting everything into a central cluster. Bacalhau significantly reduces the challenge of transforming the data before migration. Again, a very common problem that is annoyingly hard to solve today. Now, the second big thing that we see people using Bacalhau is executing over unreliable networking. So now we've talked about before that your data scientist might be out there in the world, and she says, okay, well, there are these places that I'd like to execute some compute against. Maybe it's a single app that is in a global deployment. Maybe it's I'm executing across cloud. I have things, TPUs on Google. I want to use Graviton on AWS. My data is on Azure, so on and so forth. How do you, in fact, execute with a single control plane across all these various platforms? But then, like I said before, you have self-driving cars, you have airplanes, you have refrigerators, you have ships, you have all these various places that you also want to execute against. And let's assume, for the sake of argument, that she has figured out how to deploy to these various places. The truth is, with these central clusters, they need permanent and regular connectivity to your central compute cluster in order to operate properly. That's how they're built. And you can hack at them in order to say, okay, well, my node is actually over there, just work on it. But what you often get is that these things appear and disappear at very regular intervals. Networks are highly unreliable, especially as you begin crossing latency boundaries. And people are like, well, all right, I'm not deploying to a plane. I'm just, I'm in whatever Brazil region, and I'm deploying to whatever South Korea. Guess what? Just as bad. People think that stuff, is super reliable. I promise you it's not. You are going to run into network problems. And these central cluster systems are not designed for that. You need systems that understand how to manage that. With Bacalhau, that's exactly what we have built, right? Instead of deploying directly to these edge locations, we have systems that are built to take advantage when these things become available to deploy in a regular and repeatable manner. And that particular system is designed for the way the world is built today. The hope of us going out and solving for true, globally reliable networking is much, much harder than just, in fact, having a platform that is built to understand that these networks come and go and that we can queue up and be reliable across these latency boundaries. So that's number two. The third big area we see is using data in isolation. So in this case, before Bacalhau, you would have something like a center of excellence. So this is often your ML group, your AI group will be core to your company, and they will want to deploy models and other things into particular organizations. Now, the way central orchestration systems work today is they often require, like I said, continual connectivity back and forth between that central API server and the individual organizations. And oftentimes, they'll require connectivity between each other. Nodes need to see each other, or you might need to have understanding between them. But if you get into a regulated industry, first, having things cross organizational boundaries is verboten, right? Absolutely not. Welcome to the SEC giving you a call. But even worse, having any information pushed back into those central orchestration systems can also be a PII or other leakage. It's incredibly hard to get this exactly right because these systems are not designed to have that kind of isolation between them. With Bacalhau, it's designed for the opposite. What you have is you'll have a central Bacalhau, or you'll connect into the Bacalhau server. The Bacalhau server will have awareness and separation in between these various organizations. And then you will communicate via that Bacalhau system to deploy particular jobs into locations. And then all the data and jobs and things will occur within that location itself rather than being passed back, because that's the way the system is designed. Now again, you can do this with other central orchestration systems. I don't want to badmouth them. They're all possible. But it does require a lot of work to build it yourself. And what we're saying is, hey, we've changed this and flipped it all on its head and said, hey, with the awareness that this is how the world looks today, how would you design a system to support that? And then we can be a great complement to these other central orchestration systems. So Bacalhau processes the jobs in place. Without moving the data, it limits leaked information as a first-class effort. So that's the past year. that's the best year. We are at the third COD summit today. Can you imagine what's coming next? First, ask me a question. That's what's coming next. But the question is, what have you done for me lately? So let's talk about new, great, cool features. We have 4 to talk about today. The first is self-hosted Bacalhau. So you might have a Bacalhau cluster. We are running a Bacalhau cluster in the cloud right now for you to mess around with. Please come, try it out. It's absolutely free. We would love to engage and see what you're doing, get bugs, all that kind of good stuff. And we have people all over the world, data scientists, developers, and so on, are engaging. Hundreds of thousands of jobs being executed every month, and we are extremely excited to do it. However, maybe you have a very private data center with many locks around it or something, I don't know. And you don't want to talk to the public cluster at all. What do? Well, that's where you get to self-hosted Bacalhau. And what would that look like? Well, it would look like this. Am I in the right one? No. There we go. So you might think that it's challenging to start a Bacalhau. I want to point out right there, it's one command. That's it. Bacalhau serve. And very conveniently, it spits out the next command for you. Here it gives you a peer string for you to run. You take this, and here we're going to show you a dashboard. I've pre-recorded this because it takes just a little bit of time to do this. Actually, I didn't pre-record it. Simon did. Thank you, Simon. And in one line of a bash script, we're going to spin up 50. Here you can see I'm typing my second command, Bacalhau serve, or Simon is, and we're going to enter that peer string from what you saw earlier. Presto, off you go. Behind the scenes, it went and spun it up, 50 nodes. That's it. That's it. Try and do that with Kubernetes. I love Kubernetes to death. You cannot do that with Kubernetes. And it's because we know, the team that's putting this together has the battle scars in doing this, understands how complex these things are, and has really made it a first-class effort to make it very simple. Now, again, this also doesn't have the same level of functionality that Kubernetes does, but we are dedicated as we move forward to making this relentlessly easy to add, subtract, combine, make servers work together and give you a very easy way to operate and manage it. I mentioned right there, one command to serve it, then you take the output of the first command into the second command, and you can start your cluster. And that is entirely private. It doesn't touch public IPFS. It doesn't require you to understand IPFS. We do all that for you. It doesn't require touching the public network. Nothing. It is entirely yours, entirely self-hosted. It executes next to your self-hosted data. That could be in your central cluster, on AWS, on GCP, on Azure, or in your own private data centers, or at the edge, you name it, it runs. It's great for obviously regulated industries, and we're already talking to quite a few folks around that. It also is great for private sharing between organizations. If you want to have folks operate across them, this is perfect for that. So that's feature number 1, self-hosted Bacalhau. Feature number 2, ask me a question. No? All right. We call it insulated jobs. So before Bacalhau, let's say you had 2 organizations that wanted to work side by side, and they both want to collaborate. Org B says, okay, great, let's collaborate. Can I get access to your data? And our woman in Org A says, sure, I'd love to, but GDPR, right? Which is unbelievably common. And so our woman in Org B is without any luck. With Bacalhau, we have a feature in insulated jobs to make this a reality. So Bacalhau starts and creates a path for people to have secure enclaves where you submit your jobs and your outputs. And so now our woman in Org B says, I'd like to submit our data. The woman in Org A says, great, off we go, submit your job. She builds her job and submits it into the secure enclave. Our woman in Org A looks at the job. You can introspect. This is the container. This is the parameters, so on and so forth. She says it's great. Off it goes. It runs on servers inside of Org A on those private clusters we were talking about earlier, over the private data, and then produces a result. And only the result is what's passed back, except it's not passed back immediately. Our auditor is able to go and look at that, make sure that the data is exactly what was correct. She takes it, passes it back, and our woman in org B can now download it. And again, that path can be done today on other systems, but we have built it in, and this feature is already running and good for you. And on top of that, we additionally have a feature called Octostore. So every single one of the steps you just saw is audited in a common and central place for you to trace into the future. And those jobs have lineage between them. So as you execute one and then decide to take the result of that data set and execute a second, you use the innovation developed at Protocol Lab around generating CIDs and having permanent hashing all the way down. And you can say, oh, this data set was created from this workload over here, and we're going to use that data set in the future. And presto, now you have a lineage between them. We store all that together for you. What does this look like? Let's go over here. So we're going to run through this again fairly quickly. I'm going to stop right here just for a second. There's a little bit of language here because we're doing something really cool, which is accessing a local SQLite database from a Bacalhau job. And you can see there the second half of it is just a query. We're executing against that. So the first thing Simon has done here is we'll execute that. It's sitting there and waiting. We go back and we see in the dashboard, and this will be available via APIs and other automated systems as well, but just to demonstrate here, you can see the exact job that is being executed. I can see the query, I can see the parameters and so on. And when I'm ready, I can moderate the job and say, look, looks great, I'm working out my expenses, and submit it. That job is now run, it's running in progress, and we go back to the dashboard. So now behind the scenes, the job has gone through, it is executed, and the results of the job are now present there as well. It's triggered an event, and we know that here the job is ready to go. I can go look at the results and say, yes, this is ready to go. They're waiting in a secure enclave. I go back, I decide to moderate the job and say, the results are as I expected, and I can now release it. And now our user is able to download. Now, before that, they weren't able to do anything, and they certainly weren't able to go and access that SQLite database. They were able to do that entirely from outside that organization, but through 2 levels of auditing. And again, there are many ways to interact with this. You have auditing, you have automated hooks, and coming soon, we will have things like integration with Active Directory, or authentication systems, automated policy engine, automated PII checkers, webhooks, and so on. But you can see, I think, hopefully, the power of something like this, where now you have built-in gates for these core systems. So that's insulated jobs. The third is, ask me a question. Anyone? No. Enterprise federated learning. So federated learning is an incredibly powerful tool. It allows you to take centralized ML training, which normally requires an enormous amount of communication between central servers and your external servers. However, centralized federated learning won't work in many scenarios, particularly regulatory or user preferences or things like that, or in particular data volume, which you've heard me talk about already today, how hard it is moving data around. This allows you to unlock ML training in lots of scenarios, medical, FinServ. Maybe it's just way users think about their overall servers. And the normal architecture for federated learning looks like this. You'll have a central server which drives the training process, and then you'll have clients that run against private data. Now that's fine, that's a good start, but that still risks many of the issues that we saw in centralized ML training and centralized compute orchestration before. And one of the problems is around like auditing, being able to track, reducing your blast radius, like how much you could potentially leak through if that central API or if central server gets hacked or things like that, and especially oversight over those training processes. You're ultimately handing a lot of that off to fantastic frameworks, but frameworks that assume a level of trust that a lot of folks aren't ready for. That's where we call it enterprise federated learning. In this case, you're reusing the exact same architecture we talked about before. You use Bacalhau as a job mesh, allows you to execute arbitrary Docker, WASM, insulated jobs on top of it to give you federated control, security, and auditing. And then on top of that, you use things like federated learning and other jobs that you want to access that private data without any risk of leakage. And in this case, it looks something like this. Now, I don't have enough time to give you a demo. It's unfortunately a little bit long. But like, it looks very similar to that automated job you saw, or excuse me, insulated job you saw earlier, except with the Bacalhau approval and privacy gate. And again, you can use the automated webhooks and other things like that that we will be building to give you even more automation around these kind of things. But the proxy allows you to separate from that central server and ensure that things have reduced leakage. So I'll just skip over that. I mean, it's fine. You heard me talk about all the benefits there. Okay, so that's almost done. What's the final thing? Ask me a question. Okay, general availability. So when last we spoke, in November, we were at beta. First thing we knew, new logo. Everyone use the new logo. That's the most important bit. But second, and most importantly, we are at 1.0. Bacalhau, yes. Thank you. There, the engineering, applaud the engineering team, well done. Bacalhau is now generally available in 1.0. We will be taking on regular releases, quarterly or whatever. We are working through, and this is most important, we want to work through with you, the community, what the deprecation and shared governance model will be. It is incredibly important that we're building on your behalf. It can't just be us building for ourselves. Help us make this better. And especially prioritizing those features that help you build on top of the Bacalhau system is incredibly important for us. So we need your features, your comments in order to do this right. We just started our API working group. And so please come by. What's in our roadmap? Well, like I said, this is our thoughts about roadmap. I'd really like it to not come from us, but one of the things we've heard most is about better and more variation around jobs. Long-running jobs, daemon jobs, streaming jobs, run this job on green, run this job on the cheap, on spot, or other things like that, event-triggered jobs. There's lots of concepts we've heard around jobs. Our system is built for these kind of things, but like we need to flesh it out and get these things to GA. But also a lot of enterprise features. We have a really cool feature, you'll hear about it later this week, called Project Amplify, which allows you to run little mini DAGs or workflow execution as soon as your job finishes, things you'd like to do, secure it, submit it for exfil checkers, things like that. Authentication, authorization plugins, data catalogs, so you can see everything that Bacalhau sees and only run on the things that you have permission to do, hosted clusters, and so on. But again, better yet, you tell us. Please come. In that context, we also really want to kick off the Bacalhau community in a much more fervent way. We want to have bi-weekly community calls, quarterly workshops. We'll have newsletters. We have our Bacalhau Slack, which we would love for you to come join. And, other than that, that's basically it. So that is Bacalhau 2023, first half anyway. Any questions? Yeah.
So general availability.
Right here.
Thank you. Is it general availability as software or as a service that I can use? Like, very simple example. Can I buy Bacalhau capacity?
Very interesting question. We should talk afterward. The question was around buying, I guess you have the mic, so it doesn't matter. The question was around buying Bacalhau capacity. So we are talking to a lot of folks. In particular, I didn't get a chance to talk about some of the folks we're working with right now. LabDAO, for example, is doing some amazing work where they are creating private, or they have on their plans, they're working towards creating private Bacalhau clusters that would run only for individual labs. And we are working with them to establish exactly what that would look like. The direct answer to your question is, think of the general availability as for the Bacalhau platform, not for the hosted service. If you want a hosted service, we are happy to talk, and we are in the midst of talking with folks right now about what a private service offering would look like on a one-on-one basis. I should stress, we love our Bacalhau public network, but it is very much a proof of concept. I would not run anything on there that you absolutely need to rely on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I ran some examples that require a GPU, and I kind of had a lot of trouble getting that.
We want to hear those bugs. The question was, had trouble with running on GPUs. We're well aware that A lot of the things get very in demand, and so they get backed up. That doesn't mean we can't give better feedback and stuff like that. Please find me afterward, and we'll talk about like what we can do to make it clearer. Yeah, just say it, and I'll repeat the question. Oh, yeah. We can try this out. There we are. There we are. What is a secure enclave? Does it have anything to do with device-bound secure elements? No, we think of it more as a platform-style secure enclave. I don't know who asked these, so I'm looking at you as though you asked this question. I have no idea. It's a platform-level secure enclave. So it's not like it doesn't access a T or a trust execution environment or other things like that. We're happy to explore that, and folks have looked at that in the past, and so we're very interested in exploring if that's worth investing in. Most folks are okay, like, hey, as long as this doesn't leave this VM, I'm okay with that security boundary. But if you have more specific requirements than that, we're happy to talk. Insulated jobs are available on self-hosted, absolutely. Please come talk to us if you're curious. Like I said, one of the things that you'll probably want most is to tie this to your authentication system. That is not there yet, but we want to hear about those authentication systems and talk about it from there. Tools, frameworks, systems does Bacalhau use for authentication authorization? None. Because we haven't built it. The hooks are there. So what you saw in the hey, go approve this and things like that, that just accesses webhooks and other things like that. Building those connectors is not done yet, and that's one of our first priorities. Aside from the warm fuzzies I get running a Bacalhau node. Incentives. Very, very good question. There are no incentives yet. We are investigating a number of solutions out there. If you would like to contribute, that'd be great. What we would probably say is we are looking for partnerships right now through folks who do have incentive mechanisms, folks like Charity Engine, who you hear about later today, Boink, and so on. We've done work to investigate what it looks like to either partner with them, or they already have integrations today. And we're happy to explore those particular things. So we should talk about those kind of things. The other thing that I mentioned is, as far as the self-hosted thing, you would create your own Bacalhau cluster. We would show you, as we did with the feature that we launched called Water Lily AI, how to run via a bridge a private Bacalhau cluster and collect rewards for doing that. That's a little bit more complicated, but we are in very active talks with a bunch of people. Come join the Bacalhau Slack that I showed earlier, and we could talk about those things. And then finally, compute providers that use something besides Docker or Wasm, we're open to anything. The interfaces are wide open right now. The executor engine, you could go, it's something like 6 functions, and as long as you implement those 6 functions, congratulations, you've now built a new executor. Unfortunately, it's not a plugin system. So that would be a full pull request. You'd have to do it against the core code base. We've investigated and have plans at some point in the future of just saying hey, just drop your thing in here eventually, but that is absolutely not timed on the roadmap. If you have a specific request, come talk to me ASAP, and we will figure that out. And with that, I'm out of time. I'll be around, but other than that, thank you so much.